Good afternoon. I am Han Seok-ki, President of the Institute for National Security Strategy. Let us begin session 2. The session is supposed to start at 1:30 p.m. and it will last for 2 hours. The title of the session is Strategic Dialogue, and the sub-theme is Political, Economic, Social, Cultural, Diplomatic, and Security Issues to be discussed between the ROK and participating countries, which means that we are here to engage in discussions on a wide variety of topics, including politics, economy, society, culture, diplomacy, and security. So we will have very wide discussions, and we have 3 keynote presentations and 2 panel members. The first keynote presentation will be prepared and delivered by Dr. Eldor, and the second presenter is Deputy Director Alua, and the third one is Director Khairidin, and then we will have Dr. Jung Tae-in and Dr. Ha Jung-min for panel discussions. I'd like to give each keynote presenter 15 minutes, and the panel members, they will have each 10 minutes for their initial discussion. Let me now invite Dr. Eldor from Uzbekistan. He is currently serving as the director of the Institute for Strategic and Regional Studies from Uzbekistan. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great challenge to speak after the lunchtime because everyone tends to fall asleep, but I will try. Dr. Seok-ki, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the director of the Center for International and Area Studies at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, Mr. Kang Jun-young, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak in today's very important event. In my brief speech, I would like to touch upon the current relations between Korea and Central Asia states and identify the most promising areas for cooperation. Historically, since the times of the Great Silk Road, the Central Asian region always has been at the crossroads of interests of world powers. This has been the cause of many wars and conflicts. However, the peoples living on that vast territory of the region were able to benefit from their position, skillfully balancing, preserving their identity, but absorbing the positive influence of different foreign cultures, developing trade, and supporting the exchange of new ideas and knowledges, consolidating in defending their common interests. All this is now firmly embedded in the modern, I would say, genetic code of the Central Asian states. Realizing the importance of the region's openness to mutually beneficial cooperation with all interested outside forces, standing for deepening inter-regional integration, avoiding being drawn into various geopolitical confrontations, Central Asia has been transformed today into a stable, sustainable, and consolidated region. As a result, over the last 7 years, there has been a stable growth of regional economic indicators. The GDP of Central Asian countries grew up by 6%. Intra-regional trade increased 4.5 times. Mutual investments almost doubled. In turn, the foreign trade turnover of the states of the region has more than doubled, and the volume of attracted foreign investments has doubled and reached more than $50 billion. And by 2050, population of the region is going to grow up to 100 million people. The new Central Asia is becoming a point of attraction for world powers and leading states, including South Korea. But it is important to mention that ties between Korea and Central Asia have historical roots that go back centuries, and previous speakers already mentioned that. Vivid evidence of this is paintings discovered during excavations of the Afrasiab site in Samarkand, which depicted ambassadors of the ancient Korea state which existed at the beginning of the first millennium AD. Since those times, our peoples have developed deep mutual understanding and trust, which have become a solid foundation for building mutually beneficial cooperation. It is difficult to underestimate the enormous contribution that Seoul has made to the modernization of the economies of the Central Asian states. Thanks to Korean investments, such industries as automobile manufacturing, chemicals, oil and gas, information and communications, and many others received a dynamic impetus for the development. With the assistance of the Korea International Cooperation Agency, various socially significant projects have been begun to implemented in the region. Since the establishment of diplomatic relations, trade turnover between the Central Asian countries and South Korea has increased, just imagine, 730 times. And total accumulated Korean investments in the region has exceeded $18 billion. At the same time, cultural and humanitarian ties are actively developing, where the most important component is the large Korean diaspora in the countries of, living in the countries of Central Asia and numbering over 300,000 people. In turn, today the youth of the region absorb with the great interest and become familiar with Korean culture, which has gained enormous popularity, starting from the learning the language to listening to music and watching Korean movies. The institutionalization of our dialogue has played a significant role in achieving such high level of cooperation between our countries. Korea was one of the first countries to establish the Central Asia Plus format in 2007, which continues to make a significant contribution to the sustainable development and implementation of important socio-economic projects in our region. The new cooperation initiative, K-Silk Road, presented during the recent visit of the South Korean leader to Central Asia, is a clear demonstration of Seoul's commitment to building a long-term cooperation with our region. This is also confirmed by the South Korea's decision to hold the first summit of leaders in the Central Asia Plus format in Seoul in 2025. Dear colleagues, the level of cooperation achieved is of course impressive, but it absolutely does not reflect the enormous potential that our countries have accumulated. The share of Central Asia in South Korea's foreign trade turnover is less than 1%. Even for the countries of the region, the volume of trade with Seoul is not high and is at the level of 4% of the total. It seems to us that the dynamic transformation of Central Asia opens up completely new and untapped opportunities for Korea. Today, the states of the Central Asia demonstrate a strong determination to move further towards closer cooperation and express their readiness to create new way of economic development in the region based on the use of competitive advantages and complementarity of economies. In this regard, I consider as a priority to identify new common grounds and develop specific proposals in order to significantly strengthen multilateral interaction. In my opinion, it is reasonable to emphasize our interaction in the following key areas. First, the development of industrial cooperation based on the transfer of South Korean experience and technologies, as well as the use of the production and huge resources potential of Central Asian countries. In this context, we could consider adopting a regional program on technological partnership and industrial cooperation. Second, building sustainable and secure supply chains, considering the ambitious and long-term goal of the Republic of Korea to achieve global leadership in the development of strategic technologies by 2030, Central Asian countries can act as a reliable partner in creating stable supply chains in the field of critical rare earth minerals. Third, increasing environmental sustainability and adapting to climate change. The negative effects of climate change are felt most acutely in Central Asia, where the average annual temperature has increased by almost 1.5 degrees over the past 30 years. It is 2 times higher than average in the world. According to our calculations, by 2050, the shortage of fresh water in Central Asia could lead to a drop in GDP of the region by 11%. Given all the social, economic, and environmental factors, cooperation with South Korea on climate change adoption is of particular importance. Countries of Central Asia will be interested in the joint development of renewable energy resources, the implementation of modern water-saving and environmentally friendly technologies. Fourth, human capital development. The educational sphere should become an anchor area of cooperation, which will allow increasing interaction in personal training based on the best practices and standards of South Korea. Uzbekistan already has a positive experience of cooperation in this area. Today, branches of 4 South Korean universities are successfully operating in our country: Inha, Puchon, Aju, as well as the Korean International University. Fifth, expanding cooperation in the field of labor migration. Against the backdrop of the growing demographic crisis in South Korea, Central Asia can act as an important supplier of labor resources, given its increasing population growth and high level of education. Taking this into account, it seems important to work out programs related to expanding the areas where the labor of foreign citizens can be used, as well as improving measures for the professional and language training of our citizens wishing to work in South Korea. Sixth, strengthening cultural and humanitarian ties. An invaluable asset in this regard is the large Korean diaspora living in the Central Asian countries and numbering over 300,000 people. It is a connecting bridge and reliable foundation for the special nature of relations between Korea and the Central Asian countries. In this context, we propose to launch an annual forum of the network of Korean diaspora in Central Asia, with the active assistance of national Korean cultural centers in the countries of the region. This will contribute both the preservation of the national identity of Koreans living in our region and the further strengthening of the bonds of friendship, cohesion, and mutual understanding between our peoples. Thank you for your attention.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your keynote presentation.
아리포프 선생님께서는
Director
사실 우즈베키스탄에서 오셨음에도
Aripov
불구하고 오늘
Eldor, you're from Uzbekistan, but his keynote speech covered cooperation and relations between Central Asia and Korea, not just relations between Uzbekistan and Korea. Well, he's talking about how Central Asia has been evolving and has been improving in many different ways. So the new Central Asia has abundant natural resources, including mining resources and oil and gas. So in this regard, institutionalized cooperation between the Central Asia and Korea should be facilitated. And he made 6 specific suggestions and recommendations which are very practical, and I believe they can be implemented. And he also mentioned that Central Asia wishes to learn from Korea and is interested in building the supply chain network together, and also he's talking about education and human labor exchanges and how we can expand cooperation in the field of labor and migration, which means that there is an abundant labor resources in Central Asia. They can come to Korea and be trained and work and contribute to the job market. And he also mentioned about people-to-people and humanitarian exchanges utilizing the Korean diaspora living in the Central Asian region. Before the session started, when I just arrived at the venue, I had a short conversation with Dr. Eldor, and he expressed his strong will and interests in promoting exchanges between Korea and Uzbekistan. So our institute is interested in expanding exchanges and cooperation with his institute. So I believe that this will facilitate exchanges between the two regions. Thank you.
The second presentation will be by Deputy Director Aldo Vira Alua, and he is a Deputy Director at the Kazakhstan Institute for Strategic Studies under the President, and he received his doctorate degree from the National University, and he will be presenting the second keynote presentation. I was not able to read your text because it was written in Russian, so we will continue with our dialogue after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Добрый день, уважаемые участники сегодняшнего форума. В первую очередь я хотела бы поблагодарить
Distinguished participants, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Center for International Regional Studies at Tufts for this opportunity and honor to speak at this forum. We are here to discuss the future cooperation between Central Asia and Korea. It's a great pleasure to join you today. This year, the Korean government presented the K-Silk Road, and this is the first initiative for Central Asia, which covers economic, political, and human-to-human exchanges. Already, economically and socially, we have created many successful exchanges. But today, I would like to focus on some potential areas for future cooperation, as well as the future direction for our cooperation. I will be covering 4 different fields. First is creative industry. Then we will be covering urban development, esports, and stock exchanges. In these 4 areas, I do believe that we will be able to look forward to future cooperation because it holds great potential. First, let's cover creative industries. I do believe that this is one of the most important areas for cooperation because a foundation already exists. Let me talk about some data points. In Central Asia, this is an area that is developing very quickly. This is about Uzbekistan. There are over 9,300 registered companies in Uzbekistan, and there are over 100 design centers, 60 animation centers, and 30 game development centers. And every year, the National University graduates 9,300 students in the fields of communication, urban studies, hospitality economy, and marketing. In terms of Kazakhstan, we are also seeing a development of the creative industry. In 2023, we established a special department for the development of creative industries under the Ministry of Culture, Sports of the Republic of Kazakhstan, and we also established an international center for creative industries. Concerning Kyrgyzstan, from 2022, a special council under the president was formed. And the experience of Korea's development in the creative industries will be very important for Central Asia. During the last 10 years, Korea has risen from number 18 to number 6 in terms of the Global Innovation Index, and Korea has long been a leader in science and technology. South Korea is a country that has developed its creative industry, and there are many possible projects that can be conducted between Korea and Central Asia. In particular, Korea established KOKA for creative contents, and KOKA has conducted various successful projects. Second, I would like to talk about urban development and urban planning, especially focusing on smart cities. This is an area with great potential. It is expected that by 2035, according to the report by the Eurasian Development Bank, the urban population of Central Asia will increase from 39 million to 45 million. And that will cover 49% of the population of Central Asia. And related to urban development, we look forward to learning from the experience of Korea. For example, smart meters, smart street lighting, smart parking systems, automated improvement for traffic flows during rush hours. All these innovations will not only optimize energy consumption, but make everyday life more convenient. And by utilizing the experience of South Korea, we hope that this will serve as a bridge for cooperation between South Korea and Central Asia. Korea has experience in developing smart cities, for example, in Songdo and Sejong, and the first Sejong International Smart City Forum was also held in Korea. The concept of smart cities is being developed by many Central Asian countries. Related to smart cities, we wish to introduce advanced technologies, and we also look forward to development in the smart city area. The third industry that I would like to take a look at is esports. Well, esports may not be an area that we focus on normally, but I do believe that cooperation between the youth will maintain the development of esports. And people-to-people exchanges will be very active in esports. And so I believe that esports will play a pivotal role in the future. According to statistics, we can see why we need to focus on esports, because in Kazakhstan, today, about 2 to 3 million people are interested in mobile games. Mobile games is becoming very popular in Kazakhstan. As I mentioned before, 2 to 3 million young people either play esports or watch streamings of esports. And we are seeing that these numbers are increasing. This is a commonality between Central Asia and South Korea, and I believe that this is something that we can develop together. PUBG Mobile is very popular these days. In Kyrgyzstan, many athletes are playing PUBG Mobile. As of 2022, PUBG Mobile has already created a large market. Currently, Korea's share of the global market stands at 7.6%, and for the first time, the domestic gaming market surpassed the 20 trillion mark. And next, I would like to talk about the stock exchange. This will be a new and interesting area for cooperation between Central Asia and Korea. As of 2022, the stocks owned by foreigners in relation to the total market capitalization of South Korea was about 27.5%, and the KRX portion of foreigners is very high in Korea. The Korea Fund is currently playing an important role in our country. And traditionally, we do see that people of our country are more active in investing in Western shares, especially in the US. But we look forward to conducting new projects related to the Korea exchange. And I do believe that this will translate into new demands. In Kazakhstan, we are seeing that exchanging South Korean securities are quite new, but in Uzbekistan, there has been an exchange that has been established, and this covers about 200 or so listed companies. Those between the ages of 18 to 30 are very active in investing in the stock market. And so I do believe that there will be more interest in Korean shares. And as we have already heard from previous presentations, we need to accompany each other and grow together. And I hope that we can work on the creative industry, esports, and stock exchanges together so that we can continue to create interesting development projects. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have just heard from Kazakhstan, and you talked about the K-Silk Road first, and the presentation also covered promising areas, and that was indeed a very creative presentation. You covered 4 different areas. First was the creative industry. Well, the creative industry may sound a little bit unfamiliar to us, but I do believe that this will be an area for active cooperation in the future. And so Kazakhstan is creating a government agency so that they can facilitate the cooperation of the creative industry. And the presenter also talked about how we can have collaboration in this area. Next is urban cooperation and urban development, focusing on smart cities. Learning from the Korean experience of smart cities will facilitate the growth of smart cities in Central Asia. The third area is esports, and esports will cover collaboration between the youth. Well, mobile games are also very popular in Korea as well, and so we have heard that collaboration with Korea will lead to the growth of the esports industry in Central Asia as well. 27.5% of the shares traded on the Korean exchange are owned by foreigners, and based on the statistics, the presenter talked about how we can continue to work on fostering cooperation in the stock market as well. So she covered 4 different industries, and we look forward to co-prosperity and development based on these 4 industries. And so thank you for that emphasis on cooperation.
The third presenter, originally, according to the program, was going to be Director Khairuddin of the Center for Strategic Research under the President of the Republic of Tajikistan. But due to flight issues, the director was not able to be here in person. So we will need to conclude the keynote presentations here, but we'll invite the panel members for their discussions right away. Now that we heard the 2 key presentations, I'd like to now invite the panelists for their remarks. We have 2 panel members. The first one is Dr. Chung Tae-in, and he's a member of the Diplomatic Archives compilation, and he belongs to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He served as Korea's ambassador to Turkmenistan, and he has extensive experience in diplomacy. and he is known to have a particularly good understanding of Central Asia. So we're going to invite Dr. Chung for his remarks. Next, we are going to hear from Ha Jung-min, who is in charge of the foreign desk at the Donga Ilbo. The career started in E-Daily, but now is working actively in the Donga Ilbo. So we're going to invite the two panel members. But first, Dr. Chung Tae-in, I'd like to give you 15 to 20 minutes for your initial discussion.
Pleased to meet you. As have been introduced, I am Chung Tae-in. Well, I have worked in Russia and Azerbaijan and India as well, and my final post was ambassador in Turkmenistan. And so I do believe that I have a comprehensive view over Central Asia. We have one less keynote presenter today, and I think I have a little bit more time allocated to my discussion. And so I feel like I am a presenter and a discussant at the same time. We have heard from Central Asia concerning the cooperation between Korea and Central Asia, as well as different industries for cooperation. I would like to create a frame for cooperation. Well, if we take a look at Central Asia, we can call this the Turco-Mongolia belt. This is what it looks like on the map, all the way from Turkey to Mongolia. And what this reminds me of is that there is space between China and Russia. And I will talk about the meaning of this space in between. In other words, China, India, Europe are surrounding this Central Asian area. And so I think Central Asia played a role of being in between these regions. And if you take a look at the red line, when Europe started to travel by sea, then the land roads lost its prestige, and so it became weaker and weaker, and it was surrounded by the Qing dynasty from the east and also the weakening road connection in the west. But in 1991, when the former Soviet Union fell, this is what we see again. We see that this space in between China and Russia becomes more meaningful. And so it would be great if this area could develop, but there are difficulties. Let me talk about the difficulties one by one. The most big difficulty is that there are 3 connected markets, but you can see that it's about 4,000 kilometers from east of China to central China, but there is little economic value. And then it's very far to Russia. And so it actually is in between these areas, but the economic value for just logistics was not very high. So the way from Caspian to Turkey, or through India to from Iran to the Indian Ocean, or going from Afghanistan to the Indian Ocean, the most economic route is to go from India to Iran to Turkmenistan, which is about 1,000 kilometers on land. Then once you cover that 1,000 kilometers, then you can go to any region in the world. And so that really is the core of the Turco-Mongolia belt. And I think that is the difficulty that we have to solve in order to make this area prosperous. Here you can see that these are ancient paintings from Korea and Central Asia as well as Turkey. So we are all of the same language family, and so we have similar languages, which makes it easier for us to learn each other's language. And I talked about the Turco-Mongolia belt, and this culture only exists on that belt. And this is horse archery that exists in this belt only. So you can see Turkey, Turkmenistan, and Korea on the far right, and you can see that this is a culture that only exists across the Turco-Mongolia belt. So archery on a horse. Then here you can see the pictures from ancient Korea. You can see it symbolizes the four directions, east, west, south, and north. And you can see that if it's applied to reality, when I was in Turkmenistan, I have visited the Black Desert, and to the left, I can see that from the Osman perspective, the Black Sea was in the north. And in the south, there was the Red Sea. And then there's the White Sea in the west. And so you can see that the colors covered by the seas in the four direction of the Osman Empire is the same as the colors symbolized in the Korean painting symbolizing the four directions. And I believe that this is a similarity between the Turco-Mongolia belt, and I think that's a commonality that we share in our history and culture. This is from the Shilla dynasty. On the left, we have the golden crown. On the right side, we have the clay figure of the man on a cow. And you can see that we also have the painting of the flying horse. And I believe that this actually depicts the Turco archers on horses, because you can see that they always carry this pot, which is used to eat the dried beef. And why were we able to get this artifact from the Shilla dynasty sites? It's because they say that the Shilla Kim family was originally from Central Asia. So you can see that we have similar roots in Korea and Central Asia. And this is something that I have tried to summarize. So the Kim dynasty in Shilla, we can see that they are from Central Asia according to historical records. And the Sammark, Tashkent of Central Asia, including August Kent. Kent means village, and the name in front of Kent is the name of the people living in that village. Well, Gyeongju used to be called Kumsang, and the Kims, they came from Central Asia, and I think maybe this could have been translated into Alton Kant, and so the name for the city in Central Asia and the name that was used by the Kims in the Shilla dynasty are quite similar. And from the Kims, there are many academic explanations of the title of the king, but the Parks, the Suks, the Kims, they were all migrants that came to the Korean peninsula during the Shilla dynasty. And I think the title of the king is probably from their original language. Marikan, I asked a Turkish person, has said this means the king from the east in their language. And so ever since the Kims became the emperors in Shilla, they call themselves the Marikan, and I believe that this could have been from Central Asia. And so, as you're well aware, this is a picture of envoys during the ancient Goryeo dynasty. And this is on the wall painting. So ancient Koreans went all the way to this place in Central Asia. So not only do we have connections, but very deep connections between Korea and Central Asia. And so not only do we have just exchanges, but possibly the same ancestors. So what should be the direction of the ties between Central Asia and Korea in the future? Well, Central Asia and Korea complement each other. Korea has the experience of economic reforms and economic development, and we have accumulated capital and experience from this process. And in Central Asia, or the Turco-Mongolia belt, you have resources and you have a market as well as a great market for investment as well. And you have great manpower. And so I do believe that Korea and Central Asia are not in competition, but rather we have a structure that makes us complement each other. And when we add this together, then Korea and Central Asia, or the Turco-Mongolia belt, because we are from the same family, based on this commonality, we can create an economic structure that complements one another so that we can develop Korea and Central Asia together. And I would like to use the Ricardian interpretation. The economist Ricardo said that the interregional activity, such as a trade of comparative advantages between two regions, is likely to enrich both of them. And if we take that a step further, then Korea and Central Asia, or the Turco-Mongolia belt, if we need to first develop the comparative advantages. What are the comparative advantages? We have heard from the Central Asian representatives, including those advantages. We have to continue to develop the comparative advantages, and when we develop the comparative advantages, as I mentioned before, we need to trade comparative advantages, and we need to have a transport route in order to have trade. And so we have to develop this transport route, and we need to build a relevant infrastructure. And then if we take that a step even further, so we develop the comparative advantage and we have the transport infrastructure, is that the end? What we need on top of that is people and systems that operate this. In 1991, with the fall of the former Soviet Union, many Central Asian countries won their independence. That's 30 years ago. The manpower and the market structure, how well established is it? I believe that it is still in transition. And so, developing comparative advantages, building transport infrastructure, and establishing manpower and institutions are needed. And in order to achieve this, we need to base on the connection between Korea and Central Asia. We need to develop a relationship that complement each other so that we can come up with the ideal combination according to the Ricardian interpretation. And I believe that that should be the direction for our two regions. I do have a few additional suggestions. From next year, we will have the Central Asia ROK Summit. I believe that it will become a regular summit. And I believe it's a great opportunity to be hosting the summits. As you're well aware, in Korea and in the Turco-Mongolia belt, if we take into consideration the culture of these two regions, we need the leaders to meet in order to make decisions and also to have that drive to move forward. And so having a summit is also very important. So we need to make sure that we leverage these summits. Results from today's forum and various activities should be reflected in the future Central Asia ROK summits. And we need to also make sure that we work with the OTS Secretariat. And so we would need a secretariat separately for the ROK Central Asia Summit. Last but not least, we also need to work with the local autonomies. Unlike the central government, the local autonomies, they actually have practical needs for cooperation, and they are able to realize what those needs are. And under the local autonomy, there are groups of people, universities, research centers. We are seeing that in Korea, the areas outside of the Greater Seoul area is declining. And so in order to bounce back, we can collaborate with local autonomies outside of Korea. For example, Almaty, Samarkand, and Gyeongju could collaborate together because Gyeongju has ancient ties with these cities in Central Asia, and we can also facilitate student exchanges for the local universities. Academic researches and exchanges are good, but at the same time, we could have half-year or full-year students, full-year programs for student exchanges. And when the students from Central Asia come to Korea, they can stay for the program and return home, or they can stay for the long run so that they can come and contribute to the growth of Korea and their home country. There are many SMEs in local autonomies, and these SMEs, they find it very difficult to compete in the Korean market, but they may have a competitive edge in other markets, but they may need investments in order to make inroads into other markets. And so the local autonomies can play the role of matching SMEs with markets. So I did make some suggestions, but I do believe that we need to have firm targets and purposes for these cooperation activities. And I do believe that promotion of local government cooperation is very useful. The Alliance of Local Autonomies in Korea is playing the role of cooperation with Central Asia. And so if there is a window to serve this cooperation, then I believe that we will be able to reflect the demands and needs of various participants in both regions and play the role of bridging the two regions. This brings me to the end of my discussion, and I look forward to the remarks by our presenters as well. I wanted to summarize the two keynote presentations and add my own 2 cents as well. Thank you very much. Well, Ambassador Chang provided us with his comprehensive analysis of Central Asia. So Central Asia is the space between Russia and China, and we need to develop its role being surrounded by Europe and Asia as well. But you also mentioned that there's a lack of transportation infrastructure and talked about ways to improve that. And historically, there is a connection between Central Asia and Korea, and many of the things in Korea did originally come from Central Asia culturally. And so against this backdrop, if we could establish a relationship that is complementary, then we can create a new model of cooperation. And he also talked about the Ricardian interpretation, about how utilizing the comparative advantages can lead to benefiting both sides. And so that would be a great direction for future directions. And he also mentioned that with the summit between Central Asia and Korea, then we could also leverage the cooperation between local autonomies for the future. He was a panelist, but he was almost like a presenter. Thank you very much for your intervention.
Now, I'd like to invite journalist Ha Jung-min. We have a lot of time, so you don't have to be restricted in terms of time. Hello, everyone. As was introduced, I am Ha Jung-min. I'm working at the foreign desk of the Donga Ilbo newspaper. I thought that I was going to be here as just a panel member, so what I can do is to add my own remarks to what was already discussed. I am working as a journalist, and as I'm sitting here, I feel that there are a lot of things that we have not really been able to do so. It is not easy to find a news article covering Central Asia. There are a lot of news reports about what's happening in the Gaza Strip and the Middle East, as well as news articles about the U.S. presidential election. So there isn't much coverage or space in the news outlet about Central Asia. And in other times as well, you don't see much media exposure about Central Asia. But now that I've heard all these keynote presentations, I realize that there's so much potential that we can utilize by promoting cooperation between Central Asia and Korea. Well, we see a lot of news reports about China, Russia, and Europe, and the US, but not much attention has been paid to Central Asia. So what I'm thinking is maybe after the US presidential election is over, what role can the news outlets do in promoting relations between the two regions? Of course, we need to promote diplomatic relations, but we need more economic trade. We need more economic cooperation exchanges. We need more exchanges at the business level between the private sectors. Then the media may pay more attention to the Central Asian countries. Dr. Aldor and Dr. Allure made very important presentations. And on top of that, what I like to say is that tourism or travel is a very effective way to expose Korean people to Central Asia. And there are many interesting tourist sites in Central Asia. Well, many Koreans have learned about Azerbaijan because of two very influential YouTubers who have more than 2 million subscribers. We have GwakTube and Pani Boto, and these two YouTubers went to Azerbaijan and they traveled together in that country, and their videos became super popular, and that is how young people in Korea were able to know about this country. So these two influencers, they went to Azerbaijan and they took a bath in oil, and they went through very interesting experiences and activities, and I thought that such videos were very influential. And also there is an Ishki Lake, which is beautiful. And in Central Asia, there are beautiful scenes and natural landscapes. And the prices are very affordable, but we don't have many tour packages and offerings for people in Korea to visit Central Asia. So I think we need to promote that, because young Korean people can travel in Central Asia, and people in Central Asia can come to visit Korea. So in this regard, I hope that there will be more effort at the government level and also at the private sector level to promote tourism between the two regions, and this will lead to a better understanding among people about each other. And if such activities continue to expand, then the media will start to pay more attention to what's happening in Central Asia, and will be able to introduce Central Asia to our Korean readers. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your remarks. So we heard the two keynote presentations and two panel discussions, but we have spent 55 minutes and I'm given 2 hours. So we have 1 hour that is available for discussion. I would like to open the floor for questions, comments, anything. So I would like to open the floor.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
두 분 소장님과 부소장님
Thank you to our two presenters,
패널리스트
and thank you to our two panelists.
저는 한국외국어대학교
I am from Hufs.
하정민 차장님께서 지적을 하셨지만
As Mr. Ha has mentioned, despite the fact that we have had long relations, Korea and Central Asia, we are not knowledgeable about each other.
우리 사업단이 이런 자리를 마련하고
Our project agency has created this forum, and it's not easy to create this forum, but we have been able to invite many organizations here because when we first study a region, we start with introducing that region. That is the start of research. But I think we are past that stage. We already know Central Asia, what are their merits, how attractive they are, why do we need to develop collaboration with them. Ever since we had diplomatic ties from 92 for last 30 years, we have already covered this. And as Ambassador Chung has mentioned, we now need to thread all of these efforts to make our efforts fruitful.
오늘 사실 이 자리에 참석하신
Today, we have with us
죄송합니다. 제가 이름이
Director Eldor, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but we have Deputy Director Alua. It's very difficult to have such high-level guests joining us here today. And they also work in practice and in diplomacy, and
제안한 6가지의 안건들을
the
집행하실 수 있는 힘을 갖고
agenda that has been mentioned through the presentations, they are eligible to actually see it through. And so it's not just a proposal, but this is a serious proposal. And they are delivering these presentations because they're able to implement this.
생각하는 4가지 핵심적 협력
Deputy Director Alua talked about 4 industries, and I believe that these 4 industries are being envisioned by Kazakhstan.
저희는 저희가 다 초대장을
But we have sent our invitation to other strategic research institutes of other Central Asian countries. Well, the head of Azerbaijan is actually in London, and Kyrgyzstan mentioned they could not participate, and they
약속이 되셨는데
rejected our invitation last week, and Tajikistan mentioned that they cannot participate only last afternoon. But whatever is mentioned here will surely be shared. And through this opportunity, I do hope that we could have a clear view about each other's hopes, and
전략을 수립해야 되는데
I hope we can have practical action following this.
그 제안 사항과
So we have had 6 proposals and 4 industries that have been suggested, and Ambassador Chung shared with us hints of how we can thread this together.
상설 집행 기구가 있다면
And if there is a standing body like a secretariat, we would be able to implement more efficiently. C5 plus Korea is important, but bilateral relations are also very important. And so we need to have in-depth bilateral dialogue.
제안을 해주셔서
And thank you for proposing such bodies.
그리고 마지막으로
And last but not least,
Network of the Korean Diaspora in
you
Central
talked
Asia.
about the network of Korean diaspora in Central Asia.
노마드 월드 게임에 지금 참여하시는
Well, we are not participating in the World Nomad Games currently, but I hope that we will be able to find ways to participate in the World Nomad Games. The Korean diaspora is a practical connecting point that already exists. And so they need to be leveraged for our relations with Central Asia so that we can put into action the 6 proposals and 4 industries that have been suggested today. And so I hope that based on what has been suggested today, we can look forward to more discussions in the future. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
역시 주최 측이라서 그런지
Well, he is representing the organizers, so his remarks were very detailed, and he also talked about the importance of having a standing body or secretariat. And I also agree with him because Central Asia is very important. And to add a little bit of my own, I teach many foreign students, and it is unfortunate that we don't have many experts who are specialized in Central Asia. At HUBS, this university is playing a key part in promoting the understanding of Central Asia. At our institute, we have foreign students, but at our institute, we don't have the capacity to be able to nurture experts in Central Asia. But I would say that the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies is the only institution that is able to nurture experts in Central Asia. And in doing so, I hope that we will have more individuals who are well knowledgeable about this region and can facilitate cooperation. Now, Dr. Ko. I really enjoyed the presentations and discussions. Director Eldor and Deputy Director Alua, thank you so much for traveling all the way to Korea so that we could listen to the insights offered by these experts. So it was very meaningful. My name is Ko Myung-hyun, and I am working at the Institute for National Security Strategy for the Republic of Korea. From the point of view of Korea, we all know that Central Asia is a very important economic partner to Korea. And at the same time, there may be a couple of follow-up questions. For instance, we all know that Central Asia has a great geopolitical significance. It is rich in natural resources and critical minerals. And that is why Korea is promoting cooperation with Central Asian countries. But there's something that we need to pay attention to when it comes to reading between the lines. Why is Central Asia strategically important? Their importance is increasing because of the strategic competition between the US and China and the closer ties between Russia and North Korea, and also the war in Ukraine and the declining influence of Russia. So in that sense, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan may have more enhanced expectations from Korea, not just from a diplomatic perspective, but also other kinds of expectations that these two countries have about Korea. So I'd like to get their input. Thank you very much for your questions. He is a researcher at our institute, and he is well-versed and has been conducting a lot of research on these very important questions. So later, Director Aldo or Deputy Director Alua may answer this question later. But first, let's open up and get more questions.
네, 그럼 일단 1차적으로
So we have accepted the first round of questions and comments, and we will now go back to Director Eldor and Deputy Director Alua for their response.
Unfortunately, I really missed the meaning of the question. So you're asking about the possible areas of cooperation in security sphere? What?
So I'll pose the question in English then. It's better this way, clearly. So my question was, clearly there's a lot of synergy to be achieved between Central Asian countries and South Korea, given the economic complementarity. That's the beginning of my question. But then I guess the core part of my question is you're exactly right. So given the background of the intensifying geopolitical competition between China and the United States, which really puts the spotlight on the Central Asian countries. This is clearly because China is going ahead with the Belt and Road Initiative, which puts Central Asia in a spotlight. There's also the growing closeness between China and Russia as part of this growing anti-Western front or bloc. And then there's also the issue of the decline of Russia's influence in Russia's traditional sphere of influence, which Central Asia was part of. So given all these important seismic, I would say, geopolitical changes that are taking place, I believe Central Asian states probably expect more than just economic partnership with South Korea. There could be discussions on potentially security cooperation between the two countries or between Korea and the region as a whole. So this is a question that I wanted to ask you.
Of course, thank you for your question. You mentioned about the geopolitical competition, which we feel also in Central Asia. And I mentioned it in my speech too, that Central Asia was always on the crossroads of interest of world powers. And now it's in our genetic code, let's say, trying to balance and not allow to be drawn into geopolitical competition. And in this sense, geopolitical role of Korea in Central Asia is very important. It's very important because presence of Korea in Central Asia, presence Turkey in Central Asia, India, Central Asia, helps us to preserve geopolitical pluralism in the region. It gives us other alternatives for the economic cooperation, for the transport corridors, and in this sense, again, I just would like to stress that the geopolitical role of Korea in this sense is very important. Regarding security cooperation, you know that Uzbekistan has the border with Afghanistan. It is one of the main challenges for Central Asian security. You know, previously we looked at Afghanistan only as a country which presents only challenges and threats. And now we really are trying to be more pragmatic. Today, Taliban controls the whole country, and we're trying not just to block our contacts with them, but trying to involve them into regional economic cooperation. And Ambassador just showed that actually the shortest way from Central Asia to the ocean, you know that Central Asia actually is a double landlocked country. In order to reach ocean, we need to cross at least two borders. But the shortest way is through Afghanistan to Pakistan, to the Gwadar, to Peshawar. And we believe that opening up this alternative, establishing this trans-Afghan corridor, will not only helps us to diversify transport corridors, but also will present unique opportunities for the development, because countries of Central Asia will have the access to the vast market of Pakistan, of India, and actually our goods in these areas are quite competitive. We believe that building this route, we will not only solve economic problems, but also will also help to preserve peace in Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan, through the whole history, played a role of geopolitical buffer, you know, dividing Russian Empire and Great Britain Empire, then Soviet Union and the West. And now we would like to see Afghanistan not as a buffer, but as a bridge which could connect these two regions. Of course, issues of religious extremism, terrorism, drug trafficking, All these issues, could be discussed, and we have quite good experience in dealing with these issues. Thank you.
오케이. 다른 또 질문 없으십니까?
Thank you. Any other questions?
그러면 조르드 말리나 선생님께서는
Then
코멘트 하실
I'd
거
like
있으세요?
to invite Deputy Director Alua. Any comments?
중에서 뭐 코멘트 하실
Any
거
comments about the discussions that we have had so far?
Что касается безопасности, я не специалист в этой сфере.
With respect to security, I am not really an expert, so I won't be able to comment on security issues. But what I can say is that just like what Dr. Eldor mentioned, I believe that it is very important to maintain a balance. As you may know very well, the SCO summit was held this year, and I believe that such platforms of dialogue will serve as a foundation for future programs and future cooperation. And I hope that this will lead to more bridges connecting our two regions.
If it's possible, I'd just like to add that what my colleague just said, very important thing. Because a lot of people consider SCO as an anti-Western bloc, which involve China, Russia, other countries. But it is a strong position of Uzbekistan, and my colleague already mentioned that it is the same position of Kazakhstan, that we do not approve any bloc approach from the SCO. It's just the organization which help us to improve transport corridors, to improve trade and economic relations. And we do not support the strengthening of military component of this organization.
네. 정태인 선생님.
Yes, Ambassador Chung, I would like to add to this conversation concerning the question from the Institute for National Security Strategies of the Republic of Korea. Well, through my intervention, I talked about the connection between Korea and Central Asia through various perspectives. The reason for me to share this is, unlike other regions like Latin America or Southeast Asia, Korea is not part of a certain region. So we're not grouped together with China nor with Japan. So we are a loner in the international community. But how long are we going to remain a loner? And so we need to overcome this situation. And through the Turco-Mongolia belt, we have these connections from the ancient times. So we are not a loner. Geopolitically, we have been alone in our region, but I do believe that we can have complementary economic relations, and through these relations, then perhaps we can belong to a group as well, because we can have a stronger stance in the international community when we are a part of a group. And if we take a look at the recent geopolitical situation, there was the war in 2020, and 20% of the Azerbaijan land was dominated by Armenia, and this was supported by Russia. And in 2020, Azerbaijan got help from Turkey, and this area was then recovered, and it was half a success. And then 3 years later, in 2023, in September of 2023, in fact, this Nagorno-Karabakh area was invaded again. So the whole of the 20% that they had lost were recovered in 2023. Within Armenia, there's a Russian military base, and in this area, there are 1,900 Russian peacekeepers. But how was Azerbaijan able to recover the 20% of the land that they had lost to Armenia? I think that really is very meaningful. Of course, in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. But before that, in 2014, there was the issue of the Crimea annexation. And so the influence of Russia is decreasing, and we are seeing that from the recovery of the 20% of the land. And Russia had established a military connection with Armenia, and they were not able to do anything about the recovery of land. And so we are seeing that the influence of the former Soviet Union area held by Russia is decreasing. And as a new independent state located between Russia and China, there are the 5 Central Asian countries. Of course, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, they still have Russian bases. And there are bases in Armenia as well, but we are seeing the incident in 2023. And so the 5 Central Asian countries, in particular the Turco-Mongolia Belt area, what will happen here? So rather than being influenced by other big powers, it should remain independent and solid, and that would help the peace and prosperity of this area. And I do believe that Korea can play a role in this, and it would also help Korea because we would be able to move out of our status of being a loner. And so I think this is an area where we can certainly collaborate.
Thank you very much. In our session, we have one less keynote presenter, so we would have to adjust the time. We would continue our discussions, but let's see how far we can go. We can wrap up a little earlier than scheduled, maybe around 3:05. But if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead.
예, 안녕하십니까. 저는 유네스코와
Hello.
태국영상센터에서 정책개발실장을
I am
맡고 있는 김덕순이라고 합니다.
Kim Deok-sun from HK+, UNESCO. I'm in charge of policy formulation. It's been 14 years since our center has been established, and since the opening of our center, we have been promoting cultural exchanges with Central Asia. But compared to other regions, we know that cooperation with Central Asia has been going on really well. It is partly thanks to the similarities that Korea has with Central Asia, and when it comes to planning something and implementing something, whether it is a big event or a small event, we have been able to accumulate experiences, success, and successful hosting of diverse projects. And I enjoyed listening to the keynote presentations and the discussions. We now better understand the strategic importance of Central Asia and how we can promote cooperation in many different ways. And I agree with what has been discussed. But my question is, well, there are many different areas, including diplomacy, security, politics, and economy, but we need different approaches to different domains. For instance, for economic cooperation, we can talk about the comparative advantages according to Ricardo. We can think about economic synergies, how we can create economic synergies. But when it comes to culture, we need a different approach because culture is a different domain than economy. For instance, in promoting cultural exchanges and cooperation, it is not so much about comparative advantages and who has a more competitive edge or not. It is based on mutual respect and appreciation of one another's culture, and that is the foundation and the philosophy of our cooperation in the cultural domain. So, when we plan for cooperation between Korea and Central Asia, we may need to employ different approaches depending on what kind of domain you would like to promote cooperation in. So, there may be some potential issues or challenges you may experience if you try to apply the same standard for all domains. So you need to differentiate your strategies and approaches. So in that sense, I'd like to ask the two keynote presenters if there are any comments you can have about these potential issues.
Thank you. I am from Hufs, and I am a professor of Central Asian Studies, and I have one comment and one question. Let me start with my comment. When it comes to culture or strategy or any challenges that we deal with, in the end, it is related to geopolitics. Because during the Cold War, Central Asia had no connection with South Korea. In the 90s, with the fall of the former Soviet Union, we are resuming cooperation with Central Asia. Ever since the war in Ukraine and also the war in Gaza, when geopolitics change, then we may fall back to the 90s where we could not cooperate at all. So for those of you here today, and the presenters in particular, of course, geopolitics mostly centers around the US, EU, and China, and to some extent Russia, although their influence is weaker these days. So this is a game between these strong powers. Central Asia, Mongolia, Korea. How can we respond to these strong powers? So what are your thoughts concerning this issue?
So, regarding these two questions, the keynote presenters, are you going to respond? Please go ahead.
You know, everyone just mentioning that presence of Russia in Central Asia is weakening. I rather would not agree with this. If you look at the figures of trade turnover, if you look at the investments which are coming from Russia to Central Asia, you will see that it's dynamically growing. But at the same time, if you will compare Russia and China, so you will see that during last, let's say, 10 years, 10 years ago, Russia was #1 trade partner for all Central Asian countries, was the key investor in the region. Now, situation completely different. Now, #1 trade partner is China. #1 investor is China. So, position of Russia compared to China is weakening, but not in absolute figures. So it's, I think, very important moment which we should clarify. Regarding cultural contexts, you know, we already discussed how important is expert dialogue, but unfortunately, again, it's my assessment, but our expert dialogue started to develop just during last 2 years. And I think it's really limits our relations, because expert dialogue should pave the way for the political cooperation. But in our case, it's vice versa. Dialogue is quite, our expert dialogue is quite behind the political cooperation, economic cooperation of both countries. I think if we would like to see some more progress in this regard, we should starting to see each other more often Today I just find out so many institutions, experts who is interested in Central Asia. We do not have such kind of contacts. And one of my ideas, which I discussed with Korean partners, that let's establish, for example, Korean-Uzbek expert dialogue. Let's meet on a regular basis. Let's discuss some specific issues with the invitation of experts who knows the subject very well, and let's produce some new ideas for our political leadership. Thank you.
Я хотела бы про культурный контекст тоже обозначить. Я с вами согласна.
What I would like to mention is that I agree with all of you. And if there are different areas of cooperation, then we need different approaches. It's not a matter of what is better, but what I would like to mention is that we have the grounds for cooperation. Whether it be Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan or other Central Asian countries, there's great potential for cooperation. I believe that the potential for cooperation is very high in terms of culture. We share the same values, and we have potential for cooperation in education, in particular higher education. For example, we can conduct cross-cultural studies. One example would be research on what Koreans think about Central Asia and what people in Central Asia think about Korea. I believe that culture would definitely be an area that can attract more young people to join the cooperation, because the younger generation, they know about the other region more than the existing generation, and I believe that it's important to bring them into the cooperation.
We still have some time left, and I personally have a question that I would like to ask to Deputy Director Aluva. So you talked about cyber sports and stock exchange and so on.
From the perspective of Central Asia, of course, it would be great to have economic cooperation in esports and stock exchanges. But from the perspective of Korean companies, what would be a good area of cooperation? Korean companies will need to invest and cooperate. And so what would be some areas that Korean companies would be interested in when they make investments into Central Asia? Of course, Korean companies could also be interested in esports or stock exchanges, but what other areas could Korean companies be interested in? So, Deputy Director Alua, if you were from a Korean company, what would your interest be in when you invest in Central Asia?
Я думаю, если брать из самых 4 сфер,
Well,
самое, наверное, перспективное и для
I believe that of the 4 areas that I had named,
городское развитие,
Korean companies would probably be interested in urban planning and urban development, in particular related to smart cities. I do believe that there's great potential in terms of smart cities, such as smart meters, technology transfers, and technologies to resolve traffic congestion. And so I believe that Korean technology and Korean companies could be interested in urban planning and in developing smart cities. I think this would definitely be of interest.
지금 시간이 3시 딱 3시입니다. 죄송합니다.
Thank you.
마이크 전달해 주시죠.
So, can you please send the microphone to the gentleman in the back?
Thank you. My name is Fakhridin from Uzbekistan Embassy. I have a question to Ms. 하주민 from 동아일보. You mentioned about the lack of awareness in Korea about our Central Asian region, and you also mentioned about the rising media in our country, which more and more frequently covers South Korean in their coverage, and so in your opinion, what should be done? So you mentioned about the YouTubers, you mentioned about the tourism tours, and what else should be done in order to raise the visibility of our country in Korea? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, I know that you're working at the embassy. I believe that diplomats need to work harder because currently we have 4 superpowers, Russia, China, the US and Japan. They have regular interviews with journalists, and also middle powers, Australia or other middle power countries. When new ambassadors are positioned in Korea, or when they have some issues, they always organize regular interviews and briefings with the press. But I've been working as a journalist for almost 20 years, but I haven't really had much chance to have a press interview with ambassadors from Central Asia and from other countries in that region. I know that these embassies and diplomatic missions, you are here stationed in Korea to promote your countries in Korea. So I hope that there will be more active requests and invitation for journalists to come and interview with you. Well, if there's a saying among journalists that if a dog bites a person, then it's not newsworthy, but if a person bites a dog, then it is newsworthy. So if your statements and news releases are typical and just ordinary substance, then it may not get the attention of the press. But I know that Central Asia can add a lot more and offer a lot more when it comes to their relations with North Korea and Russia and other strategic situations in Central Asia. So there was an interview with the ambassador of Ukraine and so Uzbekistan and so Ukraine, and this Ukraine ambassador talked about North Korea a lot and how it is important to discourage North Korea from getting closer to Russia by supplying weapons and other military supplies to Russia. So it was interesting that the ambassador's approach to talking to the media was quite different than traditional approaches, and this was rather newsworthy. So when you arrange and plan for interviews with the media, I hope that you will try to offer more unique perspectives and unique stands and positions. And I hope that I will soon be able to have an interview with your ambassador soon.
네, 감사합니다. 또 다른 분 계세요?
Thank you. Any other questions?
주한 몽골 대사관에
I am from the Mongolian embassy. Next year, there is the summit between Central Asia and Korea. And thank you for inviting Mongolia to this forum. Thank you very much for this invitation. Korea and Central Asian countries have the common trait of having the same language family of Ural-Altai language family. So Korea, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Turkey, this belt shares the same language family. Well, the professor talked about the role of Mongolia previously. Ever since 2 years ago, Mongolia has started a dialogue of countries who share the same language family, and we have had this dialogue for 2 years, and we had the participation of Central Asia and Korea as well. When I was a boy, I always read in textbook that Mongolia is a Central Asian country, and many Mongolians use Russian and speak Russian, and we also use Russian characters, and we are influenced by the Russian culture. Ever since democratization in the 90s, we continue to learn about how we have similarities with South Korea. For example, we have the Lunar New Year and also emphasis on manners. And so we are influenced by South Korea, and Mongolia understands the perspective of Korea of Central Asia and Central Asia of Korea. And so, as I mentioned before, the dialogue of the same language family, we hope to expand that dialogue every year. And we are also working with KOICA from Korea, and we hope to continue to expand our dialogue. That is our plan. In 1976, we have signed our diplomatic ties with North Korea, and so we actually enjoy good relations with many of the neighboring countries. And so I do hope that since Mongolia is in between Korea and Central Asia geographically, we can play a bridging role. Thank you very much. Your Korean is excellent, by the way. And so it's probably because our languages are from the same language family. Your Korean language is great. Well, are there any other questions from the floor?
네.
아까 제가 질문을 했는데 두 번째
I
받아서 죄송합니다.
asked the question already, but it's my second time having the floor.
제가 말씀드리고자 하는
What I'd like to say is
우리가 할 수 있습니다.
that there's a lot that we can do.
이렇게 문화
We can work together in terms of culture, education, and science,
이 포럼에
and
몽골
Korea, Mongolia, Central Asia. We need to build a bridge.
아시아 따로 있고요.
Currently, we're rather separated. There's Mongolia, there's Korea, there's Central Asia, but we need to be able to build more connections in the relevant areas, one by one. And as we continue to work in this direction, I believe that we can continue to maintain and nurture our relations despite any external situations. Thank you.
그 답이 안 나오셔도 답을 말씀해 주신
Well,
것 같은데.
it seems that you were looking for that answer, but you answered it yourself. Thank you very
다른 또
much.
질문이나 또
Are there any other comments or questions from the floor?
네.
Yes?
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
정말 중요한 포럼에
At this very important forum, it's a great honor for me to participate. I am Chung Go-eun from the Research Center at Hufs, and so as someone who majored in Chinese culture, this is my question. Well, in Korea, when we learn about the North, it's very limited what we learn about the North because China has written a history and we are very used to Chinese history. And so when we think about the North, then we tend to understand the North from the perspective of China. So when we say the North, they sound scary and barbaric, perhaps. And so, when we heard from Ms. Ha from the Donghwa Daily, the young generations, they are traveling to Central Asia, and that feels very new because the actual culture in the North is very different from what we envisioned when we were young. And so we were not able to deliver this in terms of language, but I also saw the travel vlogs of Pani Bottle and Kwak Tube, and I wanted to take a look at what they wanted to say. They wanted to talk about the gentle culture of the North, how kind the people, how warm the people were in the North. And so they were able to experience this warm culture. And I think that was conveyed very delicately through their dialogue in their vlog on YouTube. And so we were not aware of this, but our perspective of the North was perhaps quite distorted. And so in this era of YouTube, we are living in an era where individuals can have their own channels. And so we're not learning about Central Asia from official channels, but through these private channels, we are now able to learn about Central Asia. And personally, it's quite amazing. And at the same time, I feel like there is much more that we can do. So through this Culture and Strategies Forum, I hope that we will be able to create an opportunity to learn about Central Asia, not only through personal YouTube channels, but also through official channels like today's forum. So from the country's perspective and diplomatic perspective, I hope that it will be an opportunity for us to share each other's culture. And because of China, Japan, or Russia, these big countries, we focus on these large countries, and that leads to a distortion of our understanding of Central Asia. So diplomatic ties and exchanges are important, but at the same time, we also need to think about the cultural aspect. What are the important cultural assets of Central Asia? And I hope that it could be promoted through official channels. And we need a system in order to enable these exchanges. And if there are any strategies that are being considered in this perspective, I would like to have that information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who can address your question? What do you think? I'm not aware of any such strategic efforts. Maybe Professor Kang, you and your agency need to start working on that, right? Yes, we will. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, please go ahead. Well, maybe I'm speaking too much, but as was mentioned, there may be some biases and misunderstandings about Central Asia. There's an animation movie that I really don't like, Mulan. Well, there our ancestors are depicted as a devil, and this was a very popular animation movie around the world. So then, what does that mean? There's one thing we need to do. We have Central Asia and northern countries. We can work together to produce animation films. For instance, I'm not sure if the movie industries in our respective countries are interested in doing so. Well, Sinbad and the Arab stories have been utilized to spread the culture and introduce the culture of the Middle East. So what we can do, maybe, is to engage in such activities, content production. We can produce animation movies and other content together. We can work on that. And even if it is commercially successful, then it will be even better. But even though it may not be commercially successful, I believe this will be quite significant. And you mentioned that you're studying China and engaged in Chinese studies. And my question is how long the term China has been used. Because when you look at the history, half of China's history is actually the history of northern countries and Central Asia. So what does really constitute China's history? Because then these evil forces in Mulan, they controlled half of the territories of modern-day China. So what does that mean? We may need to work together to dissect such a history from a different perspective. Thank you.
Well, I believe that we should probably discuss this at a future opportunity because it is a little bit off topic. Any other questions or comments?
Могу я сказать, English, Russian, на русском, да, просто.
May I speak in Russian? Well, I would like to talk about cooperation. I am currently the Secretary General of the National Program Officer of the UNESCO Regional Office in Almaty, and we are working with various research institutes related to culture and education. And we have continued cooperation for over a decade, and from an expert perspective, and from the UNESCO perspective, we are continuing to foster experts. And last week, we have worked with 8 Korean students, and we invited them to Kyrgyzstan. And they were given opportunities to experience the culture of Kyrgyzstan. And so active cooperation is being conducted as a part of the UNESCO program. And concerning further efforts, from the academic perspective, we would like to have more cooperation with Korean universities. For example, with Japanese universities, we are collaborating in archaeology, and we are having archaeological cooperation in ancient temples with Japanese universities. And Japanese students have opportunities for internships through these programs, and I hope that we can look forward to cooperation with Korean universities as well. We have had many questions today, and one of the questions addressed what interest would Korean companies have in Central Asia? Well, I believe that tourism would be a great area because there are many tourist agencies in Korea, and I do believe that we can cooperate with them even further. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan could collaborate based on the Silk Road, and I believe that it would be a very interesting cooperation, and I do believe that it will be of interest to Korean tourists. And Central Asians can also travel to Korea. And so that would be one way for Korean tourist agencies to be interested in Central Asia. And there are medical tourists coming from Central Asia to Korea. So they are coming to Korea for medical treatment. And so hospitals, possibly they can open their branches in Central Asia. I understand that large hospitals in Korea can open centers in Central Asia, creating creative industry. Concerning creative industries, there is a large Korean diaspora in Central Asia, and in Central Asia, many people are well aware of Korean culture. My daughter knows about all of the Korean idol groups, and if there is a concert by a Korean idol group, then we could invite those concerts to Central Asia. And concerning films, our directors from Central Asia is participating in the Busan International Film Festival. And so, as a part of the creative industry, we can continue to cooperate related to movies. And there is so much room for cooperation, and we are open to such cooperation. And then let me talk about national security, because it was mentioned in our discussion today. Well, I'm not an expert in national security, but I believe that cooperation for cybersecurity is also very important at this point in time. I look forward to experts joining together for information exchanges in the field of cybersecurity. Thank you.
So she talked about cultural exchanges and other areas for exchanges, and her comments were quite practical and specific. When we think about exchanges between Korea and Central Asia, we're still in the beginning phase, and I believe that we have a lot of potential for future cooperation.
Thank you very much. My name is Aygul. I am from the regional UNESCO office in Almaty, and I would like to continue the idea that Sabira told about possible cooperation and about possible activities. And probably most of you know that within UNESCO we have different networks. Network of associated schools of UNESCO, network of UNESCO chairs at the university level, and network of UNESCO clubs. If we are talking about youth, and UNESCO clubs is the very good opportunity and platform for cooperation, not only in the sphere of culture, but education as well. And the Kazakhstani Federation of National Federation of UNESCO clubs is very active, and just I think for the last 2 years, Kazakhstan chairs the international, or the last year, Kazakhstan chairs and the head of international board of UNESCO clubs. And if we are talking about cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is a new trend, a new program at the universities. It is indeed possible to cooperate and to expand with the experts and with the training programs in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for mentioning a new area for cooperation, because UNESCO is very active and we are seeing great remarks from the UNESCO community. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, I wanted to end at 3, but we are coming to 3:20 because many people had comments or questions. I think we can fill 3:30 if other people add additional comments or questions. Are there any other comments or questions from the floor? If not, let us end session 2. And if you have further questions, let us continue our dialogue through session 3. Through session 2, we were able to discuss the need for exchanges between Korea and Central Asia, and we learned of the potential for development in the future. And we also need the efforts on the part of Korea for such cooperation. I look forward to these discussions continuing to develop into the future. And not only will we talk the talk, but we also hope that we will be able to put our words into action. This brings us to the end of session 2. Let us take a half-hour break before we start session 3. Thank you very much.